The International Monetary Fund issued a stark warning. The IMF believes President Trump's tariffs will harm the global economy. The United States economy will be hit the hardest. The tariffs have created a climate of uncertainty. This uncertainty makes it difficult for businesses to plan. The IMF's warnings are taken seriously by world leaders. The IMF is concerned about the impact of tariffs on global trade. The IMF believes that the tariffs will slow global economic growth. It has revised its growth forecasts downward. The IMF report has been met with concern by economists and policymakers. Some experts believe that the IMF's forecasts are too optimistic. They argue that the tariffs could have a more severe impact on the global economy. The Trump administration has defended its use of tariffs. The administration argues that the tariffs are necessary to protect American jobs and businesses. However, many economists disagree with this assessment. The tariffs have had a mixed impact on the U.S. economy. Some businesses have benefited from the tariffs. However, other businesses have been hurt by the tariffs. The International Monetary Fund's World Economic Outlook report paints a concerning picture of the global economy. The report, released in April 2024, revised growth projections downwards, highlighting the negative impact of rising trade tensions and policy uncertainties. The IMF now predicts global economic growth to slow to 2.8% in 2025. Emerging markets and developing economies, previously engines of global growth, are expected to experience more moderate slowdowns. Advanced economies are also predicted to see slower growth in 2025. Trade tensions represent a significant and growing risk, particularly for export-dependent economies. The United States, the architect of the escalating trade war, is predicted to be among the hardest hit by its own policies. The IMF projects U.S. economic growth to slow to a mere 1.8% in 2025. This significant downward revision reflects the tangible consequences of President Trump's aggressive tariff regime. These tariffs have increased costs for businesses and consumers alike. The resulting price increases have dampened consumer demand. Furthermore, the uncertainty surrounding trade policy has created a chilling effect on business investment. Companies are hesitant to make long-term investment decisions amidst constantly shifting tariff landscapes. The IMF's downward revision of the U.S. growth forecast is particularly striking considering its previous projections. The IMF's analysis reveals that the tariffs have had a ripple effect throughout the U.S. economy. The manufacturing sector, a supposed beneficiary of the tariffs, has been hit particularly hard. The increased costs of imported goods have eroded purchasing power and dampened consumer spending. This inflationary pressure further complicates the Federal Reserve's efforts to manage the economy. The tariffs have inflicted significant damage on the U.S. economy, slowing growth, driving up prices, and creating uncertainty. The IMF's analysis goes beyond broad economic indicators, dissecting the specific impacts of Trump's tariffs on various sectors of the U.S. economy. The steel and aluminum tariffs imposed in 2023 provide a stark example of the unintended consequences of protectionist policies. Downstream industries reliant on steel and aluminum as inputs face significantly higher costs. The automotive industry, heavily reliant on imported steel and aluminum, was particularly hard hit. Car manufacturers facing higher input costs and supply chain disruptions were forced to raise prices. The tariffs sparked retaliatory measures from trading partners like Canada, Mexico, and the European Union. Beyond the immediate economic damage, the IMF highlights the corrosive impact of policy uncertainty on business confidence and investment. The Trump administration's unpredictable approach to trade policy created a climate of uncertainty that made it difficult for businesses to plan for the future. This uncertainty had a chilling effect on business investment. Companies became hesitant to make long-term investments in new factories, equipment, or research and development. This decline in investment not only constrained current economic activity, but also had long-term implications for productivity growth and innovation. The IMF's analysis underscores the importance of predictable and rules-based trade policies for fostering business confidence and investment. The IMF's report debunks the myth that tariffs are a cost-free tool for protecting domestic industries. The reality is that tariffs act as a tax, ultimately paid by American businesses and consumers in the form of higher prices, reduced choices, and slower economic growth. When the U.S. imposes tariffs on imported goods, those costs are typically passed on to businesses that rely on those imports as inputs. These businesses, facing higher costs for raw materials, components, or finished goods, have little choice but to raise prices. Consumers face higher prices for a wide range of goods, from everyday necessities to durable goods. The IMF's analysis reveals that the tariffs imposed by the Trump administration amounted to a significant tax increase on American businesses and consumers. The negative impacts of the tariffs extended far beyond the specific industries and consumers directly affected. The IMF's report highlights the interconnectedness of the global economy, demonstrating how the tariffs triggered a cascade of unintended consequences. The tariffs, by disrupting global supply chains, created uncertainty and volatility in commodity markets. Businesses facing unpredictable tariff rates and trade policies were forced to adjust their sourcing strategies. These disruptions rippled throughout the economy, impacting industries far removed from the initial targets of the tariffs. The IMF's analysis serves as a stark reminder that in a globally integrated economy, protectionist policies like tariffs ultimately harm the very economy they were intended to protect. The release of the IMF's World Economic Outlook report with its stark warnings about the negative impacts of the trade war reverberated throughout the global economic community. Economists and financial analysts voiced their agreement with the IMF's assessment, emphasizing the high costs and risks associated with protectionism. Paul Krugman, Nobel laureate in economics, characterized the tariffs as self-inflicted wounds on the U.S. economy. He argued that the tariffs were driving up prices for consumers, hurting businesses, and undermining global economic stability. Krugman further criticized the Trump administration's rationale for the tariffs, arguing that they were based on a flawed understanding of how trade works. Other prominent economists echoed Krugman's concerns, highlighting the historical parallels between protectionist policies and economic downturns. The escalating trade war and its potential impact on global economic growth also sent ripples of concern through the world's central banks. The U.S. Federal Reserve, facing the dual challenges of rising inflation and slowing economic growth, adopted a more cautious approach to monetary policy. The trade war contributed to inflationary pressures, making it more difficult for the Fed to balance its mandate of price stability with its goal of supporting economic growth. Jerome Powell, chair of the Federal Reserve, acknowledged the growing risks posed by the trade war. The European Central Bank also expressed concerns about the escalating trade war. Mario Draghi, then president of the ECB, warned that the tariffs and retaliatory measures were a threat to the global economy. The IMF's warning about the negative impact of Trump's tariffs highlighted the profound uncertainty that had gripped the global economy. The rules-based trading system that had underpinned decades of global economic growth was under threat. Christine Lagarde, then managing director of the IMF, described the global economy as being at a delicate moment. She warned that the escalating trade war risked undermining business confidence and disrupting global supply chains. The global economy faced a new and significant threat to its stability and prosperity. The IMF's report served as a wake-up call, reminding policymakers and business leaders alike that protectionist policies ultimately harm everyone. The IMF's warnings about the trade war amplified calls for de-escalation and rules-based trade. Policymakers and business leaders recognized the urgent need to reverse course. The IMF stressed dialogue and cooperation in resolving trade disputes. It urged countries to work within the World Trade Organization framework. Christine Lagarde emerged as a leading voice for de-escalation. She cautioned against protectionism, arguing it would harm all countries. Lagarde urged world leaders to find cooperative solutions. The European Union also called for a rules-based trading system. EU leaders emphasized multilateralism and dialogue with the US. They made it clear they would retaliate against unfair trade practices. Section 2. Seeking alternative solutions. As the trade war dragged on, policymakers and business leaders began exploring alternative solutions to mitigate the economic damage and reduce reliance on tariffs. These efforts focused on diversifying trade partners, strengthening regional trade agreements, and addressing the underlying causes of trade imbalances. Many countries sought to diversify their trade relationships to reduce their dependence on the US and Chinese markets. This diversification effort involved negotiating new trade agreements with other countries and regions, as well as strengthening existing partnerships. Regional trade agreements such as the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, also known as the CPTPP, and the EU-Japan Economic Partnership Agreement, gained renewed momentum as countries sought to secure their economic interests outside the framework of the WTO. These agreements aim to reduce trade barriers, promote investment, and foster economic integration among member countries. Furthermore, some policymakers recognize the need to address the underlying causes of trade imbalances, such as differences in labor costs, environmental regulations, and intellectual property protection. They argued that addressing these issues through dialogue and cooperation would be more effective than resorting to tariffs. Despite calls for de-escalation and efforts to find alternative solutions, the trade war cast a long shadow over the global economy. The prolonged uncertainty surrounding trade policy continued to weigh on business confidence, disrupt supply chains, and dampen investment. The IMF, in its subsequent World Economic Outlook updates, consistently highlighted the risks posed by the trade war and the uncertainty it created. It warned that a failure to resolve trade tensions could lead to a further slowdown in global economic growth with potentially severe consequences for jobs, investment, and living standards. The uncertainty generated by the trade war extended beyond the specific industries and countries directly affected. It created a climate of volatility and unpredictability that made it difficult for businesses to make long-term investment decisions. This hesitancy to invest, in turn, hampered economic growth and job creation. The trade war, by undermining the rules-based trading system, also risked triggering a cascade of unintended consequences. It emboldened other countries to pursue their own protectionist agendas, potentially leading to a fragmentation of the global economy and a decline in international cooperation. The trade war, ignited by the Trump administration's aggressive tariff policies, left an indelible mark on the global economy. The IMF's warnings about the negative consequences of protectionism proved prescient, as the tariffs triggered a cascade of unintended consequences that rippled throughout the global trading system. The tariffs, far from achieving their stated goals of protecting American jobs and reducing the trade deficit, instead inflicted significant damage on the U.S. economy and beyond. They drove up prices for businesses and consumers, disrupted global supply chains, and dampened business investment, ultimately slowing economic growth and undermining global economic stability. The trade war also exposed the fragility of the rules-based trading system that had underpinned decades of global economic growth. The WTO, weakened by internal divisions and facing challenges to its authority, struggled to contain the escalating trade tensions and enforce the very rules it was designed to uphold. The legacy of the trade war serves as a cautionary tale about the perils of protectionism in an interconnected world. It underscores the importance of international cooperation, dialogue, and a commitment to rules-based trade for ensuring sustainable and inclusive economic growth. The trade war highlighted the economic costs of protectionism and the broader political and social implications of globalization. The backlash against globalization, fueled by job losses and income inequality, created fertile ground for populist leaders. The Trump administration's America First rhetoric and its protectionist policies resonated with those left behind by globalization. This sentiment overlooked the benefits of globalization, like lower prices and new markets for businesses. The trade war exposed the limitations of globalization. The unequal distribution of benefits fueled resentment. Addressing these inequalities is crucial for sustainable globalization. The trade war inflicted significant damage but also presented an opportunity for reflection and reform. It forced everyone to confront the challenges and opportunities of globalization and to promote sustainable growth. Strengthening the rules-based trading system is crucial. The WTO remains the most effective forum for resolving trade disputes and setting global trade rules. Reforming the WTO is essential for a stable trading environment. Addressing the distributional consequences of globalization is crucial. Policies supporting workers and communities, such as job training programs, education and skills development initiatives, and social safety nets, ensure the benefits of trade are shared broadly. Dialogue and cooperation are essential for managing globalization's challenges. Open communication and finding common ground build trust and resolve disputes peacefully.